Welcome to the Unlocking Dyscalculia podcast today. I'm your host for today, Heather Brand, and I have with us Brendan Lee. Welcome, Brendan.
Hello.
And Brendan, I'm going to let you share a little bit about your background in just a second. But one of the things that we really love that we've seen from Brendan is he has put together some really great infographics that talk about some teaching myths and then also share what you can do instead of these myths. So, Brendan, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on this YouTube video or podcast, however you're engaging with this resource. And yeah, watched some of your previous stuff, and it's really great what you're doing. And it's quite a privilege to be alongside some of your previous guests that you've had on. And I don't think I've really followed um, a similar sort of path to a lot of those other people that you've had on. You've had some academics on there, and I actually started out as a high school phys ed teacher, so very different to the stuff that I'm talking about now. And I guess I went through the emotional roller coaster that a lot of teachers go through, where on one hand I really loved what I was doing, and still had that passion for teaching young people, but on the other hand, I was becoming quite frustrated with, I guess, the system in general. And we had a lot of young people coming into high school already disengaged from their learning, and it just kind of got to me where I felt like I wasn't being supported, from my school to really ensure that these young people were able to do as well as they could in the classroom. And I always had these other kind of things pulling at me to, try different things. And I ended up leaving the teaching profession for a couple of years and ran a cafe. Story for another day, and very different experience. But I always had this kind of pull that I felt like I had unfinished business in education and wanted to see what was happening at the other end. I always had a bit of a curiosity as to, like, well, why are these kids coming into high school the way that they were coming into high school? And, is there anything that can be done about that? And the Dunning-Kruger effect definitely got me there, where you think you know more than you do. And I thought, like, how hard can it be? I got put into a year 4 classroom, and I thought, how hard can it be to teach a bunch of, 9 and 10-year-olds when I've been teaching, 17 and 18-year-olds? How hard can it be? It was really difficult. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Somehow my qualifications allowed me to transfer into the primary classroom, but I did not have the content knowledge that was needed to teach like, you need to be an expert in every subject. I was even being an expert in PE, that didn't really help me in the primary space because I didn't have that pedagogical content knowledge. So it was just very different. I had to learn the hard way, but I guess when I made that transition, I went in it with a very different mindset to how I previously had before, where this time, I kind of refer to myself as like a born again teacher, where this time I had this newfound purpose in what I was doing. So I wasn't going to let all that external noise get to me. So, how other teachers thought about me, or school leadership, what they thought about me, that wasn't going to get to me this time. It was more like, all right, I'm in it to make as big an impact as I can for as many young people as possible. And I guess from running businesses, I always had a bit of an idea about, like, how I spread my influence, I guess. And so right from the start, I started blogging, and I kind of had this idea of, like, just blogging my journey, and it just kind of evolved from there, from like just blogging about what I was doing to, and if you ever go back to some of the things I was writing about, very different to how I think currently. But yeah, I've left it up there because, yeah, if anyone ever wants to do it, it can kind of just show, like, how I've actually progressed it myself in my own learning. Um, and then, yeah, from there, as I learnt more, I actually wanted to share the things that I was learning, not just what I was doing. And so it kind of just naturally progressed into going from blogging into, engaging more on social media, to then being asked to present at different conferences, to then being asked to work with schools as like a consultant. And then at the same time, I actually started my own podcast, the Knowledge for Teachers podcast. And that allowed me to then, yeah, have conversations with people that I really wanted to talk to that, I guess like what you're doing. It's hard to just reach out to people and say, oh, can we just have a chat? Without having some sort of platform to share as well. And so, yeah, just really enjoyed, I guess, working in a space where I've been able to connect with, yeah, people from all over the world, all over the country, and I guess use what I've been learning to help bridge that gap between research and practice. And as I've done more and more of that, I've learned how to do that in a more effective manner as well. So it's not just a matter of like saying, look, this is the information, this is evidence-based practice, this is what we need to be doing, but actually understanding like teachers need more than that. They need to know precisely like what does this look like in the classroom. And so that's where I've started to just fine tune I guess the information that I provide now so that it's more concrete and less abstract. And so hopefully it's more user friendly and yeah, teachers are able to actually understand, all right, well, these are the things that we need to be doing.
Awesome. Yeah. And those infographics that you had were really a great way to begin that conversation and make it very concrete of, here's the myth and then here's what we should be doing instead. So let's dive into that. You had quite a few of them. And so we've just picked a few to talk about today. And then
Yeah,
we'll
cool.
link to those so that people can go look at those in more depth. But the first one we put down for today is the myth of believing that students learn better if they discover things for themselves. So, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of these myths that we'll talk about today, they kind of come back to like a very romantic view that we can have of education, where like it sounds great if we all discover things for ourselves and if we're able to just go into these problem-solving tasks and we can work in groups and it's all going to be really collaborative and we're going to have these really rich discussions and discover things for ourselves. But essentially that's not how learning happens. You can't just dive straight in the deep end and know how to do all of that stuff. Even as adults, it's quite difficult to do that. If you go to a professional learning session or professional development workshop and you're asked to do something in a group, even adults find that difficult. You're going to find that we still have people who are going to put their hand up and they're going to dominate those tasks. And you're going to have other people that kind of sit back and they're going to lack that knowledge and the confidence. And so the same thing is only amplified in our classroom where we have young people. And if we ask them to do that stuff, they don't have the self-regulation skills to know that if I just sit here and look busy, or it look like I'm contributing, then the teacher's going to leave me alone. What they do instead is that they'll start, displaying really unproductive learning behavior, which can be things like, talking to their friends about things that aren't on topic. It can literally be throwing things across the classroom. It can be running around the classroom. Um, if we don't set students up for success, and so it sounds great that yes, we're going to present this task and then our students are just going to have to play around with it, and then eventually they'll be able to work it out. Or, maybe then after, a lesson where they haven't quite been able to get there, then the teacher might intervene and show them how to do that. It's just not an effective and efficient way. And for any teachers that have actually tried to do that, like what they would have found is that the students all they work out is they work out that they're no good at maths. Okay. And so then they end up having this really negative self-efficacy of what they can actually do in the subject, when in actual fact, if we had just taught them what they need to know, yeah, they're going to be firstly more likely to experience success, which we know that success breeds success. And then the other kind of aspect to this as well is that you're going to have some students that will probably be able to do it themselves because they might have the requisite knowledge to do it. But then the other students in that group, because often we do this stuff in groups as well, the other students in the group, they're going to try to copy what this other student has done,
Mm.
but that student might not have actually done it in the most efficient and effective way. And most of the times that student would not actually be able to teach those others how to do it either. And so you've got like all of these misconceptions being picked up, and we also know that it's a lot harder to unlearn misconceptions than it is to actually teach someone, effectively and efficiently in the first place. So yeah, it's something which sounds great in theory, but to actually get it happening, it's really difficult.
Right, right. And the research really just doesn't back up that all of our kids are learning best that way. We see that a lot with our students, that people have assumed they should pick up on details that they haven't, especially because of their learning disabilities. And so those those gaps are holding them back as they try to go forward. And sometimes those gaps are as simple as understanding that the numeral 3 can mean 3 fingers or 3 hops on a number line or 3 cubes, and all those little pieces, if someone had just explicitly told them, they could have kept moving on, but they weren't explicitly told, and so it holds them back.
Yeah, really great point. And I think it also just gets back to how, like, as experts, teachers really suffer from that curse of knowledge where we forget how much we know and how little our students know when they're, especially when they're at that novice end of that novice to expert continuum. And so what we find is that yeah, we constantly we just assume that they're going to know things, or we assume because they're in, a certain year level that they're going to know things, or they should be able to do certain things, but that's not always the case. Yeah.
Right, right. And I think as adults, a good way sometimes to remember how hard it is to learn something new is to actually go learn something new. And
Yeah.
I recently started learning how to play the piano, and I thought that I could teach myself. I have some musical knowledge. And after a while, I finally realized, I think I do need a teacher. And when I started going to a teacher, I learned that there were things I had taught myself that were
Yeah.
actually not helpful and they were hurting me. And I had to go back and unlearn those habits.
Mm.
And so, I mean, that's kind of what happens with our students when they're novice learners. They might discover how to do something in a really inefficient, unhelpful way. And unless we as adults learn how to take that perspective, then we can really do harm to children.
Yeah.
So,
I'll often during professional learning sessions that I run, I'll often ask the question, when was the last time that you tried something complex and gave up? And often, people will say things like, yeah, trying to learn an instrument or trying to learn a new language. And like what we discover quite quickly is that even as adults, when we are asked to do a task that we don't know how to do and we haven't been provided with the modeling, haven't been provided with the scaffolding, it hasn't been sequenced in small steps, and we've just tried to work it out for ourselves, we give up. We don't persist. Okay,
right,
because we know how hard it is. We quickly work it out, and then as adults, we're able to work out. Well, this is actually going to take me a lot of time and effort to do this, and yeah, it's not worth it, essentially.
exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
we're not being graded on whether we figure it out or not. So we move on.
No. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go on to myth number 2. So, myth number 2 is assuming that students know how to do something because you've shown them once before. So, let's talk about that.
Yeah, and this really comes back to having like a strong understanding of how learning happens. Okay, and so a couple of things that like I'd talk about here, just around, so whether you're coming from a like a cognitive psychology perspective, where if we're looking at learning being a change in long-term memory, that Swallow, Kirshner, and Clark talk about. If we're coming from that perspective, then that means that if you're showing something, so you're demonstrating it in the classroom, and your students are able to do it, that's definitely an important part of learning. Like they need to be able to show that they can do things that we're teaching them how to do. But that would be more like checking for understanding, and they talk about performance versus learning. So that would be classified as being the students able to perform in the here and the now, but they haven't necessarily put this into their long-term memory. So they can do it now, but if we understand the limitations of working memory, if we don't provide them with multiple practice opportunities to build up that fluency, and then retrieval practice spaced out over time, they're going to forget this stuff. Okay, and so if we're not doing the practice that they are needed to move that into long-term memory, and we're not actually giving them the opportunities to properly learn it as well. So yeah, one of the key things when it comes to like when they're in that acquisition phase of learning. So the instructional hierarchy looks at these different phases of learning, and the first one is acquisition phase, and so that's essentially when students don't know things, right? And if they don't know it, and we might be showing it to them for the first time, they've got like a really weak ability to connect that to their existing schemas. And so we've got to gradually release that responsibility by providing them multiple opportunities to practice. And so that's going to start with like that I do phase, so that they have a really strong understanding of what a good one looks like, essentially. So the teacher is use they're modeling it. They might use a think aloud. They might give them a completed worked example to look at to see what that actually looks like. Before and I'll usually have that being like quite a small phase of the learning. So it might only go for a short period of time, and then we go into that we do phase or guided practice phase, and that's the part that will usually take up the majority of the lesson for me, and that involves a lot of checking for understanding. So like using mini whiteboards. We might do some think pair shares to get students to kind of unpack these different ideas. There'll be like lots of opportunities for students to respond. So practicing what I've just shown them how to do, using that guided cadence kind of approach, where we're starting with like a worked example or example problem pair. So we're showing them what it looks like, and then they're doing a really similar problem themselves. And then we're gradually giving them more and more things to do on that concept. Okay. And so by taking that kind of that guided cadence approach, it just allows our students to feel successful multiple times with the teacher's support. And so each time they do something, we check it. We're going to get them to do a little bit more. We check it again, and we keep going through this until eventually they're doing it all by themselves. And we're still checking in between. And so by doing that, as a teacher, like the way I kind of refer to it is that as a teacher, you should feel really confident that they can now do it independently before you release them for independent practice, which is that last phase of the gradual release of responsibility. And the analogy I use is it should feel like you're someone, your students are like the people who are traveling. And before we had things like Google Maps, they're traveling and then they come to you as a local, and they're asking you for directions to a place, and you're saying to them, look, you need to go down this way. You're going to turn left after about 100 meters. When you see this thing, then you're going to turn right, and then you're going to check for understanding. So you can say like, so where do you need to go first? Where do you need to go next? And if you don't feel like you're really confident they know how to get there, you're probably going to walk them there as well. So then you're going to provide the scaffolding that is required for them to be successful. Very few people will actually let that person go off on their own if they're not feeling confident that they can get there independently. And that's how guided practice should really feel, is that you should feel confident that they're going to be able to do that independent practice. The last thing I'll say on the gradual release responsibility is that through those phases from I do, we do, you do, it should all link up. So we're not doing something different at the we do to the I do. We're not doing something different in independent practice. That would be classified as generalization. It should be practicing what you've just shown them how to do. Look, there's some nuances involved where people might interpret things slightly differently in the I do and the we do phases, but for me, I like to kind of keep them quite separate, just so that you know what's happening at each phase. So the I do is just me doing it. The we do is, giving those practice opportunities, checking for understanding, and then yeah, that you do is where they're actually getting that independent practice.
Yeah, I love that metaphor of guiding someone through directions in town. That's perfect. Okay, so myth number 3 that we talked about is feeling that students at a certain age don't need to be using concrete materials.
Yeah, and look, this one obviously links up to a lot of the things that you guys do. And I think like one of the things that can happen when look, I'm not sure about where you guys are, but over here in Australia, like a lot of teachers lack content knowledge when it comes to maths. So whether that is because they haven't received that through initial teacher education, and so we've got like not many primary schools have math specialists in their schools. And then in high school, we have a lot of non-specialist teaching maths because of the teacher shortage. And so, yeah, teachers will generally just kind of use things that are given to them. And so they might think, they've got a student in year eight, or it could even be in year five, and they might believe, look, that they shouldn't need concrete materials anymore, because of their age that they're at. But what we know about how learning happens is that it doesn't work like that. We don't just know things because of how old we are. It's all based on our prior experiences, and maths is highly hierarchical. And so if you haven't got the prerequisite knowledge that is needed, and you don't understand concepts, then and you haven't got that concrete understanding. I referred to it before about how the professional learning they'll provide, and how adults need that concrete understanding. Well, it's exactly the same for our students as well. They need to have that concrete understanding of what the abstract concepts are. And I'll even see kindergarten teachers going to the abstract ideas way too quickly. Where they just assume that um, our 4 and 5 year olds, they're coming in, and they're already able to count, but often they've just learnt this phrase of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but they don't actually understand what each of those numbers actually represents. And so we might have to actually backtrack, and yeah, go back to using those concrete materials so that they do have a better understanding of what it is that we're actually talking about. So it's not so much that concrete materials should be used by a certain age, but it's all based on what the students actually need. And this is what responsive teaching really is that it should be based on, we're doing those checking for understanding questions so that we can see where our students are actually at.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, especially for our students. Some students can maybe infer concretely what you're talking about, but some cannot. They really do need to see it side by
Yeah.
side to make those connections. So it's really important that that gets included.
Yeah, and often it doesn't mean that we have to spend a lot of time there. Looking at the other way, sometimes teachers feel like, because they're a certain age, they need to be, playing with manipulatives all the time, every single lesson. Um, but essentially, like, it slows us down in maths. Like, if we've got to keep going back to using concrete materials, or even drawing pictures, that's going to slow us down. So we want to be moving them to the abstract ideas as quickly as possible. And we can do that by exactly like what you said there. Yeah, showing them side by side and giving them multiple representations.
Right, right. And that's where that explicit teaching comes in. If you're just using the manipulatives for discovery, Marilyn Zecker likes to say, then you're just using them as an inefficient calculator. You might as well have just pulled out a calculator. You really need to be making those connections. Just like in reading, we need to have the phonemes and the letters working in tangent together so that in the brain we're mapping those two things together.
Love it. Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, that really goes along with the next myth we were going to talk about, was feeling that students of a certain age have to use the materials. And I think we kind of covered that one, that there does come a point you need to move over to the concrete. And even Daniel Ansari's got some good work on that. It's really that you've got to get to the abstract. The abstract is really going to be predictive of your future math success. And there's a reason we have math, because it helps us be more efficient, and it even helps us unlock what's happening at the concrete level. When we have that better abstract understanding of math, then we can look at concrete in more in-depth and sophisticated ways. So we really need to have those two things working together really explicitly.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like, yeah, just that idea of, I wrote about, like, as fast as possible but as slow as necessary, and many other people have spoken about it, like, in that sense as well. But I think it's just really important that if you take that sort of mindset and that approach, then you're going to provide your students with exactly what they need.
Right. Okay, so myth number 5 is thinking that if students respond with correct answers during guided practice, then they understand it. Why is this a myth?
Yeah, so, like, sometimes what can happen is that our students can become prompt dependent. Okay, so if we just and I see teachers do this all the time, where they they might run out of time in a lesson, So they're going through the lesson, they get to, the bell goes, and they didn't get to that independent practice. And rather than seeing that as being necessary and quite an important phase of learning, they just move on to their next lesson the next day. And so what happens then is that the first time those students have to do that concept independently is in some sort of assessment. And then the teacher wonders, oh, like, why can't they do it? Like I saw my whole class, they were all able to show me confidently that they could do that in the classroom. But then everyone had forgotten it. And it can feel really quite frustrating. Like I felt frustrated before I understood how learning happened properly. I would feel frustrated as a teacher, and I'd be like they showed me they could do it. Why do they keep forgetting this stuff? But essentially it's because they never got out of guided practice. Okay. And so they've only been able to do things with the prompting and the scaffolding, and often we'll do this for students with additional learning needs. Okay, we'll think, oh yeah, they won't be able to do that independently, so I'm not going to give them any independent practice at all. But we're robbing them of what they will probably be able to do if by not giving them those opportunities. Like all those students need is they probably just need more practice than anything else. We don't really have to change what we're doing. They might need more time in that scaffolded phase, and then they might need more time in the independent phase. But that's it. And then for our other students, it's just a matter of ensuring that there's that the links between what's been done in guided practice and independent practice. And then yeah, as long as there is that link, and sometimes what we can do is we give them a different activity to do. It's on the same concept, but the students aren't actually able to transfer their understanding because that's actually generalization. So we've skipped that whole fluency building phase and gone into generalization, which is too hard for our students when they're just moving out of that acquisition phase. So yeah, we want to have a really strong connection between the two. And if you're in that scenario that I described before, where you've gotten to the end of your lesson and you haven't had time to do independent practice, and like, I'm still in the classroom, I get it. Like that, the realities is that it's going to happen to you, right?
Yeah.
Do independent practice the next day. It actually
Right.
works perfectly then, because you're then allowed time for them, to have these ideas kind of embedded overnight. Their learning's still happening overnight, and then we can touch on it again, and it's probably going to be even stronger then, because we're giving them space practice as well at the same time. So, but just don't skip the independent practice. That's the biggest thing I would kind of say, is that each of those phases of the gradual release of responsibility is extremely important. And so, yeah, just ensure that they get that. Otherwise, the first time that they're going to do things independently will be an assessment. And yeah, I guarantee you they're going to fail, and you're going to get frustrated.
Right, right. And I like what you brought up about prompting too. We have our teachers tally as they're prompting when they assess, because we don't always realize how often we're prompting until we
Yeah,
see on that assessment that they can't do it themselves. We
yeah,
sometimes have to explicitly teach our students, what do you say to yourself when you divide? So that they're
mm,
practicing retrieving those verbal instructions, because a lot of our students have dyslexia and they can
yeah,
struggle sometimes with the verbal end of that. So they
yeah.
really
Great tip.
have to be trained to have that inner monologue and know what to say to themselves.
Yeah, and I think like as teachers, like we'll even say something we're sending the students off to independent practice. Remember to do this. Like that's a massive prompt. Or we'll
Yeah.
have on the independent practice worksheet, we'll have a worked example on there. And again, like that's it's too much prompting and scaffolding. We actually want them to just do this for themselves at that phase. Or yeah, the other mistake I'll see is teachers sending them off to independent practice, but they're doing it in pairs. And so we don't actually know if they're able to do that independently or if they're relying on their friend. And so if like I've got no problem with students working in pairs, but I would classify that as actually being in the guided practice phase.
That's a really good point. Yes. Okay, so myth number 6 is believing that the academic language in math is too complex. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, and I think you guys have spoken to Sarah Powell before, haven't you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and yeah, she's all over the importance of vocabulary in maths, and I would never be able to describe it in the manner that she can. But she just talks about like how important it is because like our students are going to have to engage in it, and like vocabulary is important because it gives us specific terms for different things. Like that's why we have all of these different words in the English language. And in maths, like there are certain terminology, certain terms that are specific just for mathematics. And if we dumb it down for our students, we're actually robbing them of a proper experience in maths because they're not going to have the vocabulary that they need. And all we need to do is like on a lot of the people a lot of teachers that I speak to, they're coming from like a science of reading space first. So they'll engage in the science of reading and then start to ask questions about like, okay, so what does this look like in maths? And so then it makes a lot of sense to them, the importance of vocabulary. So I'll say to them, do exactly what you're doing in the English space when it comes to teaching vocab. Do that in maths. So look at the morphology, look at the
Yeah.
etymology. All of that stuff's going to actually help make it, more memorable for our students over time. Use examples and non-examples. Show them, yeah, like what it actually looks like, and yeah, students love it. Like they really enjoy learning about words, whether it is in the literacy or the numeracy space. They really enjoy it. And so if we can do it properly, spend the time on it, create your word walls, all of that stuff, it just really helps.
Yeah, definitely. I always say if kids can learn all the names of Pokemon, they can learn all these math vocabulary words. Sometimes people think, oh, these words are too long for the students, but yet they're going around saying things like skibbity Fortnite. So if they can say that, they can learn these math terms, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, myth number 7. This is our last one for today. Thinking that once a concept has been taught, then students can apply it in any setting.
Yeah, and look, I've touched on this idea a couple of times already, and I think that's why I really like the instructional hierarchy, because it just lays out the phases of learning, the stages of learning that we go through. And so, yeah, if when we start to see that word apply, essentially it's talking about are they able to apply what they've learned in a novel problem type? Okay, and like a lot of the conversations in maths center around like fluency. Like, do we need fluency? Do we want students to be memorizing their facts? Yeah, we do. We want them to be able to memorize their facts because then they are going to be able to apply what they've been learning, because they're not going to have to spend their working memory on thinking about like we don't want them sweating the small stuff. We want them to be able to come up with straight away what 3 times 4 is. That sort of stuff shouldn't be getting out their concrete materials and then putting them into groups or drawing out these circles and then drawing dots. Like we don't want them doing that stuff. We want them to be able to memorize it because otherwise, yeah, they're spent wasting time, wasting their working memory, and then all it takes is for them to make like one small mistake, so that they didn't quite get their dots in the circles right, and then they're going to be flipping chairs again because they're going to feel so frustrated. Like they're going to say, "Oh, I'm doing exactly what you told me to do. I've just spent 10 minutes on this." And now you're telling me that I got it wrong. And so we don't want our students to be experiencing failure time and time again. And so what we need to be doing instead is just really focusing on teaching them effectively, like I've described before, using that gradual release of responsibility, then providing practice opportunities over time, where we've got like a phase that's focused on fluency. And I know that you spoke to Corey Peltier as well, and
Yeah.
he touched on the importance of fact fluency, and so like we need that, and then maintaining that over time through things like over here we call it daily reviews in Australia, but I know that overseas it's also called things like warm-ups and do nows, but essentially what it should be is retrieval practice spaced out over time. So giving those practice opportunities, so that students have to pull things out of their heads over time and not it's not going to be forgotten. Only if we're doing that stuff, so we're providing them with the practice, will they be more likely to apply in different settings. But we still need to be giving them the structure and the scaffolding so that they understand how to approach these different problems. So having the schema-based instruction, having like attack strategies, that Sarah would have spoken about, like that's what's needed. And if we've set students up for success, they're more likely to be able to problem solve. And then what ends up happening is, we have these debates about like, whether or not students are doing their problem solving and rich learning tasks. Like, I don't think anyone in the math space is saying we should never do that. Like,
Yeah.
we all want students to be able to get there. Okay. It's just that the other stuff is really important so that they can get there. And if we get the foundational parts of maths right, you're actually going to have students who can problem solve more effectively and more often.
Right, right. And we find sometimes too that that generalization, sometimes people, again, they assume that's sort of a discovery thing, and it doesn't always have
Mm.
to be. Sometimes for our students, especially some of the ones that can be more rigid, you might find if you always practice an algorithm vertically, and then you'll realize later when it's presented horizontally, they don't recognize it. They'll
Yeah,
see it and say, I don't know how to solve that problem. And they don't realize, oh, it's the same one I just
same thing.
solved. So the more that we can help with that, explicitly teach those generalizations over time, yes, they will be able to discover more of those. But providing schemas and things like that really helps them know how to generalize that information.
Yeah, it's so funny how just the smallest things can just set them off. And as teachers, we don't even realize that we do that. Where yeah, just by simply setting out the question slightly differently,
Yeah,
requires them to generalize that concept.
right, right, exactly. Well, that was our last question for today, but can you share a little bit more about if people wanted to learn more from you, where would they go?
Yeah, look, most of my stuff will be on my website, so learnwithlee.net. I've got an online course that I'll be running starting in March. Like on all the stuff that I've spoken about today. Also, yeah, looking at assessments as well. So yeah, while I'm in Australia, because it's online, the beauty is anyone can engage with that. So yeah, just jump on the website for that. I'm pretty active on social media, so yeah, follow me on X or Twitter, or Facebook, or yeah, LinkedIn. They're probably the main ones that I'm on at the moment.
Awesome. And we always like to have this tradition of having someone share a joke or meme or pun. Did you bring one with you today?
Yeah, I found a funny one that I think yeah relates to a lot of the things that we spoke about. And so the question is, why was the equal sign so humble?
I don't know why.
Because it knew it wasn't less than or greater than anyone else.
Oh, that's cute. I haven't heard that one yet. That's a good one. Well, thanks, Brendan. It's been really great having you here with us today. And we had such a great chat, and we really appreciate you coming.
Absolute pleasure and keep doing what you're doing. Yes, having a huge impact. So thank you for having me.